Happy Thursday. Welcome back to my office hours. Happy to have you with me here today. Got a couple of things that I want to talk about today, some questions that came in, some things that are on my mind, all related to startups on the journey from idea to go to market to traction to product market fit and beyond. So if you've got questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. And as always, you can submit a question in advance by visiting this link, which is also in the description. And if you do, you can submit a video and I'll play it here. Or you can, of course, ask a text. There we go. Text question as well. If you hear it in my voice and see it, I'm tired. I've been traveling this week. I was up in Calgary in Alberta, Canada, for what they call Innovation Rodeo, which is during Stampede Week. Super fun time to be up there. I had great fun visiting the community up there. They've got a great startup community. And I was up there talking about design sprints. So I did a talk and a workshop. And so it's all on my mind. And that's going to come back a little bit later. But let's go ahead and get to today's topics here. So the first question, and this is a big one that comes up pretty frequently, and so I have a lot to say on it that I'm going to try to keep succinct. But the question is, it's some variation of I know I need to talk to customers, but I want to make sure that I have something to show them first. I want to have a product, so let me finish and do my prototype or whatever first, and we'll kind of get that get that ready. And there's a problem with that thinking. Good morning, June. Good morning to everyone else watching here today. Hello. And the problem with this type of thinking is that it's actually procrastination, and it comes from oftentimes, and I'll just kind of speak more broadly. It comes from a place of insecurity where we think that it's important for us to have a polish, to have a finish, to have a whatever that just kind of sits there at the end that we can kind of show them. Well, the problem is that done, whatever that done thing that we're looking for, we never actually hit. And so we're actually putting a target that is always just going to be moved. It's constantly moving goalposts because there is no perfect, there is no done in a startup or in any kind of product for that matter. So that's the danger of that, is that you actually don't have a finish line to cross. The second thing is that you're really increasing the size of your bet by trying to say, before I can even talk to customers, I want to build a thing. You don't know if anybody wants the thing, and life is too short to waste it building something that nobody wants, which is why in design thinking we talk about, well, you have desirability first and then you have viability and feasibility. And the idea being that at the riskiest part of any innovative product or service or anything else, the riskiest part is that people want it, right? Because if nobody wants it, who cares, right? It doesn't matter if it would theoretically make money. It doesn't matter if you can actually build the thing. If you don't have customers who will buy it, then it's just all a waste of time. So that's why we say desirability has to come first. That's why we talk about design thinking as being human-centered, and it sounds like fluffy and we got to get emotional and do all that, and that's not true. It's really just because we know we need to get people to buy it in order to understand if people are going to be interested, and we have to get inside their head. So that's where that comes from. And so because the idea of I got to build this prototype and show it would speak, to feasibility, like can we build this thing, or at best to viability, like would it actually make money or whatever. We're actually jumping ahead of this desirability thing. And so the question becomes, how do we prove desirability without actually building the big thing? And that's where that's where a lot of people then it doesn't become about the psychology of it. It's just where we get stuck. It's like, well, okay, how do we do that? And this is the value of a couple of different kinds of thinking that I want to talk about. But the big one is thinking in terms of prototypes. So really often in early stage ventures, we talk about, testing business ideas, right? And there's a great book by David Bland as part of the Strategizer series. It's actually called Testing Business Ideas, Who'da Thunk? And it's got a bunch of different tests that you can run there. Not an exhaustive list, but the closest I've seen in a book. And it's all these different kind of things you could do to say, okay, well, I'm at this particular stage, I have this kind of thing. How do I get something in front of customers so I can start getting feedback? That's what you want. And that's actually the process you want to follow. So you want to figure out, how do I actually get something that doesn't need to be a product. How do I get something in front of a customer? If you're at the idea stage, it might just be getting in front of them, having a conversation and finding out, do they even have the problem that you think they have, right? Because if they don't have the problem, they're not going to buy the solution. So before you even talk about the solution, you can find out if the customer has the problem. And once you validate that the customer has the problem, then you can figure out, okay, is this the right solution for that? And then that's where you can do really simple things like, Let me just put my value prop in front of a customer and see if it resonates. You can do that with social posts. You can do it with a landing page. You can do it with a phone call or a Zoom call or, a LinkedIn InMail. Like you can do it any way you want. You want to put a value prop in front of the people you think are your customer and see if it resonates. And when you're starting to do that, you're making progress toward building the thing, but you're making these really, really small bets along the way. And even if you have to, if you get to the point where you show something that's representative of the product, to the customer, at that point you still don't need the thing. You still want to build a prototype of whatever that is, and that can be something as simple as some slides in Google Slides or Keynote or PowerPoint or whatever that you can put in front of somebody. And when you're really early on, it could be paper drawings. It's just about getting something in front of them to get customers feedback. So how can you honestly talk about customer? How can you honestly talk to customers without a product? You just do it, right? And you just remember design thinking. What's the riskiest part? Do they have the problem? If they have the problem, do they want this particular solution for it? And if they want this particular solution for it, do you have the language right? Do you know where they are, right? Do you have the right channel? There's all those little things that you can test along the way without ever actually building the thing. And so you can kind of kick the can down the road. So that's that. Don't think you have to build something because you don't. Talk to customers before you ever build anything. It's not if you build it, they will come, but if they come, then you will build it. So June, you asked, how was my weekend in Calgary? So it was great. So I had a great time, awesome startup community up there. I met some really amazing people. And the other speakers, and workshop, facilitators that were there were also really great. And that's actually going to lead to kind of the next thing. And so, I was brought up to talk about design sprints and how you think about design sprints and how that works for entrepreneurship, for early stage startups, particularly. And so it's just been kind of on my mind, and it's just been kind of getting into everything. And so one of the questions that most entrepreneurs kind of ask is like the default position is like, what does a design sprint have to do with startups? Like, why would a startup run design sprints? And this comes from a couple of different places. So it can come from just a lot of people don't know what design sprints are, and I'll define that real quick in a second. But like a lot of people just don't know what design sprints are. And then second, we often think of the definition of design sprints as the original, like Google Ventures 5-day design sprint. There's a book by Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky that talks about that 5-day design sprint. It's an amazing process. It's fantastic. Strongly recommend. But then you're talking about like a big bet, right? It's 5 days, heads down, whole team. And so that's kind of a big bet. And you're like, well, that doesn't seem quite right for an early stage startup. For later stage startup, it's fantastic. And so that's the second kind of thing. I don't know what design sprints are, or it's this thing and that doesn't make sense. And so it just kind of comes from some of those objections. And the third way it comes from is not really understanding how it's a pattern of thinking about things. That's really where it comes down to, is that a really strong startup founder can learn to think in this kind of process. And so I gave a whole like hour-long talk on this and then a workshop. So I'm going to summarize it in like 5 minutes or something ridiculous. But this is the idea, is that what we want to do is a few different things. So this is how an entrepreneur like really should think and approach the process. And if you think about like customer development, if you think about the lean startup, if you think about like the agile process, if you think about prototyping, if you think about testing business ideas, think about all these things that we're constantly talking about and constantly teaching in the startup space. A lot of it can come back to this way that we think, that I think is really epitomized by the design sprint. So here's a breakdown of the pattern. So 30,000 foot view, you're always focusing on a wicked challenge. And so this is kind of interesting because a wicked problem or a wicked challenge or a wicked question, however you want to call it, it's wicked not because it's evil, because it's ill-defined. It's ill-defined. It doesn't actually have an answer. It has no data or contradictory data. There's no definition of done. So you can think about a question like, when you're looking at the definition of just a product, like, I have the thing, I think customers have this problem and I kind of want to build it. There's no real answer to that question. Right? You have to there's a path you can go down, but when you go and run an experiment with a customer, you're not necessarily getting an answer to the question of like, do customers want this thing? You're getting an answer to, am I on the right track? And so the question that you ask actually only serves to clarify the question that we're asking, right? Am I on the right track? And that's in contrast with like a really simple problem, like a math problem, where you have one answer and you could take different paths to get to that answer, but there's, you got an answer, like the answer is 17 or 42, right? The second kind of category of problems are ones that are more complicated than that. And so they're kind of ill-defined. They're complex. There's not one right answer. There's multiple right answers, and there are multiple paths you can get to those multiple right answers. And so, right, it's kind of hard. It's complicated, and you gotta do some work to clarify it. But the third category, those really wicked problems, the ones that don't have right answers or any answers at all, and all we can do is just try to clarify the question that we're even trying to ask. That's where innovation lives. That's where creativity lives. That's where entrepreneurs live. And that's where design sprints and all of these kinds of things, that all the processes that we go through really start with, is we're trying to answer a wicked question. Another one, like, is not even as abstract as, what is my product and who is the customer? Where are they? It could just be like, how do I onboard my customers? Like, how do I increase my retention rate? All of those kinds of things are not questions that have an answer. Right. And so we can explore that space and serve to clarify it, and then ask better questions and get answers to that, and kind of move toward where we want to go. But it's not like we can just go, oh, well, change the color to blue and move the button over here and boom. Right. It's just, there isn't a right answer to those kinds of questions. So we're always focused on like a really complicated thing. The second thing is that we force ourselves to think in a cycle that's called divergent thinking and then convergent thinking. So the idea is you create a bunch of choices and then you make a choice. So it's like quantity before quality, right? And so the idea behind any of this is that you get a bunch of information, you create a bunch of different choices, and then you find the right answer in there to focus on. And so when we do a design sprint, we do it like, okay, we're in this problem space, so this is the thing we're talking about. So first, we figure out what's the right question we want to focus on, like what's the problem we want to focus on. So we talk about all the different problems, and we do divergent thinking and come up with all the different problems that we want to focus on. And then we make a choice about the problem we want to focus on. Now that we have the problem, we have to go through it again. And we do, okay, what are all of the potential solutions? We create a bunch of choices for solutions. And then we narrow down on the one solution that we want to run. Right. And so that cycle and all of the tools that we use in startup land are all the same kind of thing. We're creating all these hypotheses. We're choosing what to focus on. And we're figuring out, okay, now that we have this hypothesis, how do we go about testing? And there's all the potential options. Okay, here's the experiment I run. Let me get some data back. It goes back into my model, and we do the whole thing again. What's the right next question? And so on and so forth. So you repeat that cycle. But there's a lot of tools that you can use that help with divergent and convergent thinking. And so if you explore the design sprint space, you can acquire this whole library of amazing tools that you can use to help out in those processes to do those kinds of things, right? And so I said that we're always asking an hypothesis, right? That's like a theme. And I also said, because they're wicked problems, these hypotheses, the questions that we're asking, are actually only serving to clarify the thing that we're trying to learn, right? So in order to get a better engagement rate, in our product, or a better activation rate or an acquisition rate, or like if there's something like that we're working on, we're not going to get a specific answer of the solution. But what we're going to do is explore that problem space and see, okay, well, maybe users are dropping off here, and here's why, and like, okay, like, look, what does a potential exploration of that space look like? And here's an experiment we can run, and then we get some data back. So we're always asking, we always find a way to ask a question that if we get the answer to, it helps us clarify. And that's what, again, if you think like build, measure, learn, that's what we're doing, is we're doing something, putting it out there, acquiring data, learning from it, and then going back through the cycle again. And so the hypotheses that we're forming are not the answers at the end of the day that we need. They're the questions that we ask in order to get better information to ask a better question. Right. So it's that kind of process. And the way that we do that is with an experiment. Right. So we always run experiments. I don't need to talk probably more about that unless you guys are curious. So set that aside. And so those experiments, though, always work in the way of prototypes, which connects back to like the first question, is that just entrepreneurs in general, broadly speaking, just don't make enough use of prototypes. Like, you can prototype absolutely anything in a disposable way. You can prototype literally anything in less than one day. Absolutely anything. In fact, there's a lot of things that you can prototype in 10 minutes. 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, right? That's the kind of, when you have, when you don't have a lot of data, that's what you want to focus on. You want to like make a really small bet, get in front of a customer, see what happens, get reaction, get data back, and just keep iterating on those prototypes as you go over and over and over and over again. And there's no question out there, there's literally no question out there that you can't come up with a prototype that you can test. None. And at the max, we're talking about a day. So you have to learn to think about, how do I take this question and go through this process of figuring out what's a narrow question that I want to answer that's going to help me clarify it, and then how do I create the small, lightweight, disposable prototype that I can use to answer that question with real customers, and then I'll go back through the process again. Right? There's a lot more I could say about prototypes, but I'm kind of pause there. And the last thing that I want to say, and this is like a meta thing here, but this is really important, and I think this is one of those things that not enough startup founders particularly internalize, and it's the idea of constraints. And so when we do design sprints, or whatever the format is, like 5-day sprints to a 90-minute sprint, doesn't matter, any kind of type of sprint, we make like a really extensive use of constraints. And there are all kinds of constraints, right? There's one of them is time. It's a 5-day design sprint, right? And then we do something on Mondays, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's a different thing. Those days are even broken out into blocks. So like we are prototyping on Thursday. We have one day. Our prototype is one day good. Right? That's a constraint. So there's a lot that you can't do inside that time period. So time is a constraint. Resources are a constraint. And this is something that ends up tripping up founders, because they go things like, okay, well, I don't have a technical co-founder. I don't have somebody who can write this code. It's like, okay, well then close off that path. That's fantastic. You just closed a door. So now you can go this way. So what can you go and do now that that's not an available option? By removing available options, it helps us think more creatively. Because while we think about things like, creativity is about thinking outside the box, it's actually not true. Yes, you do have to not think the way you were thinking before. So you do have to get outside the box, but that's only telling you what not to do. What you want to do is find the right box in which to think. And so the way you do that is by constraints, right? A box is walls. It's walls that you're sitting in, and it's constraints. You're going to say, I have this number of days, this number of dollars. I have access to these people, right? And I have this much time. And you put those constraints around yourself, and you say, what can I do to learn inside that very narrow window with those very small constraints? And so making use of constraints, understanding what they are, and then leveraging those to find answers and do what's next is really, really important. For startups. If more startup founders just internalize that concept of constraints, it would make way more progress, get their customers faster, get to revenue faster, need to raise less money, and have a much more successful rate for acquisition or whatever later on. So I just want to say that about design sprints. It's been on my mind lately. Talked about it a lot over the last few days while having fun in Calgary. So wanted to throw that down. And that's kind of it. I had those two or three really big questions, and because I'm super tired, I think I'm going to call it there. And for this week, so I'm normally here every single Thursday, but next Thursday I have a conflict, so I will not be here Thursday. But if you do have questions and you submit them, as long as it's by end of day Monday, I will actually record an answer and post that so that you can get an answer to that question. So hit that. That link that's in the description to ask a question, and I'll make sure it gets answered. Otherwise, 2 weeks from today is when I'll be back live for great fun with all of you. So June wants to do a whole show on constraints. I could easily do a whole show on constraints. Send me a more specific question, June, if you have one on that. Otherwise, I'll think about that. We'll talk about it more, because it's a really powerful, really fun concept. So cool. That's it for me. I will see you guys online or here in 2 weeks. Peace. Have fun.